Hello and welcome to the Business of Winning podcast, brought to you by Performance Insights, providing expert speakers and hosts from the world of Formula One motor racing to corporate events and conferences worldwide. Just click on www.performanceinsights.co.uk and send us your requirements.
Welcome to this second episode in our new series of the Business of Winning podcast. And joining us for this episode, we have none other than Ruth Buscombe, of which a little bit more in a moment. Now, to interview Ruth, I wasn't around to do it. I can't remember where in the world I was that particular week, but I'm delighted to say that a very good friend of mine and of Performance Insights, Toby Moody, again, a familiar name, particularly to any of you who've followed MotoGP over the years, but Toby has worked with us on a number of different programs. He's a formidable host and broadcaster, and he was only too delighted to be parachuted in to interview Ruth for this episode. Ruth's expertise really lies in data analysis and race strategy management. She comes with a first-class honours degree from the University Cambridge Department of Engineering. She started working in Formula One with Scuderia Ferrari. There's a nice first job for someone in Formula One. And that followed the completion of her master's thesis with the FIA on the topic of drag reduction systems. She worked at Ferrari as a simulations engineer, later as race strategist. She worked with drivers you might have heard of, such as Kimi Raikkonen, Fernando Alonso, and Sebastian Vettel. And she played a key role in the race-winning tactics which secured Sebastian Vettel's first win with Ferrari at the 2015 Malaysian Grand Prix, if any of you can remember that famous victory. She later moved to the Haas Formula One team in November 2015, subsequently shifted to Sauber in Hinwil, and she helped the Swiss team to finish ahead of Manor Racing in the 2016 Constructors' Championship. She spent a total of 8 years with the Swiss team, and worked with, for example, current Formula One Ferrari driver Charles Leclerc during his debut season in Formula One. And she now works, of course, as an analyst, strategist, presenter, and commentator for Formula One and F1 TV. And she brings formidable insights into race-defining strategic decisions to viewers all around the world. Really delighted to have her join us on this podcast in conversation with Toby Moody. Enjoy.
Ruth, welcome. Thank you so very much for joining me on this chat. I'm thoroughly looking forward to it, I have to say. I hope you're well.
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
The F1 season to date, what are your views about this seesaw season and how it's gone completely different from, I think, many people thought it would?
Oh, I think it's brilliant, isn't it? It's so nice when you have surprises in sport, especially. I think it's just such a great testament to all of the teams that there really are no bad cars in Formula One. I think we had a Q1 session this year where the entire field was separated by 0.8, which amounts to a little over 1% in terms of distribution. And 2017 we had teams 3.5% off the pace, and that was the norm. There was a bunch of teams that ran there. And then, you go further back to 2014 and we had to introduce a 107% rule because we had teams that were 7 or 8% off the rule and finishing 5 laps down. So, I think it's really brilliant to see kind of the level of competition. And I think it really is testament to all the hard work from all the teams and all the rule makers.
Red Bull appeared to be unstoppable, but they haven't won a Grand Prix since June. That was 8 races ago. This is now Max Verstappen's longest non-race winning streak. That's a huge surprise, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can kind of, if you kind of plot the development curve of McLaren, they were doing really well in terms of like closing that gap. And then that Miami upgrade package was really, that kind of key element. Actually, even in that race, they were still marginally slower than Verstappen's RB20 until he went over the bollard in turn 15, and it was only at that point that both closed the gap up and actually made the car pretty undrivable in turn 1. So it's been kind of incremental gains. I think it's still, the difference between actually believing it and seeing it is maybe slightly different. But yeah, I mean, I think you've seen how the aerodynamic platform has become such a key kind of front element of kind of that, the development battle, should we say, and that actually kind of going for an aerodynamic ethos with this really stable platform, because the way the regulations are set up is that the cars are inherently understeer low range and then oversteer and high speed, and then you end up having to kind of make all these kind of compromises. You can get the kind of the dreaded bouncing that we've seen kind of so often in the last couple of years, especially with the Mercedes and the Ferrari car, and you kind of end up moving your way around it. Teams have found slightly different ways of minimizing that effect, whether it's through mechanical setup, whether it's through smart little innovations that maybe the FIA has started to clamp down on, and all of that pieces together that really actually having a stable car is more than the sum of its parts in terms of the performance that you can extract. And you can kind of see that even a driver of the caliber of Max Verstappen is unable to kind of like get that RB20 round corners when there's curbs, which just shows you how difficult the engineering challenge is to create, an aerodynamically stable platform, given the rules, which is the point of the rules, to make it a difficult challenge, and really how great a job McLaren have done as well in terms of coming up with a good solution, to give both of their very talented drivers the best weapon to bring the fight to Red Bull.
Many say that not much has actually changed at McLaren. It's just a structure of how they work. Have you heard similar?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably a little bit biased because I worked with Andrea Stella many, many moons ago. He was actually kind of race engineer when I was first a graduate at Ferrari, and even then, I was lucky enough to see how he leads people, his kind of management skills. Obviously, a race engineer is a different role to a team principal, but even back in 2012, 2013, you could see just how kind of talented a leader he is and how he genuinely cares so much about the racing and about the people that put together that race team. And he really definitely tries to have an ethos of like, we're all going to win this together, and like, a race team is the sum of their parts, which you obviously see as a press quote, but I certainly have seen it firsthand, over a decade ago now. So I certainly think that's the way that he likes to lead. And I think that it's a group of many, many individuals that are all talented. Lots of them have been there for a long, long time, and they haven't got smart overnight. They've been working hard incrementally to bring McLaren back from kind of last row of the grid not that many years ago to where they are now. So
yeah, that opening race in Bahrain, they were in big trouble, weren't they? And here they are knocking on the door of a championship. What a turnaround!
Yeah, so I'm very proud of them all. Very proud of them all. I know quite a lot of them from a university. So and because I think Andrea Stella is a phenomenal team principal as well, and really cares about the people and the kind of the drivers, which is always great to see when they succeed.
You touched on working with Andrea. Just tell us about your journey into F1. How did you get to Formula One?
Well, it started a long time ago when I was still at university, actually. So I actually applied to Cambridge because I was a slightly strange kid. And I said Google, and then someone fact-checked me and was like, no, I think you asked Jeeves, because I think it was pre-Google. I think I asked Jeeves where all the technical directors went to university. And at the time, kind of the technical directors that I was aware of, actually being a McLaren fan growing up, so I knew about people like Paddy Lowe, I knew about people like James Allison, and in the UK they all went to Cambridge University, read aerospace and aerothermal engineering. So I went to Cambridge University and read aerospace and aerothermal engineering. Cambridge has got a real strong historic link with a bunch of teams, both teams and the FIA. So the J dampener, the famous McLaren mechanical device, that was done from a collaboration with Cambridge, with the Glover brothers, and then there's aerodynamics with Red Bull, and I was involved with a collaboration with the FIA. So I did my master's thesis with the late great Charlie Whiting, and supervised by a chap called Tony Purnell, who used to be the team principal of Jaguar and Red Bull before Christian was there, on basically kind of how how the DRS could be adapted from the original rules, where that we didn't have zones in qualifying, but we only had one in the race, to kind of broadly the system we have today. Obviously, it's got a lot smarter since then. So through that, I got to know a bunch of different F1 teams, of which I was kind of headhunted by Ferrari. Obviously, at the time, being a McLaren fan, that was just, it was terrible. No, it's terrible. It was who go work for them? Yeah, so I actually only went to my Ferrari interview as practice for the McLaren interview, and it was a really great. I kind of fell in love with the place immediately. And actually then had my heart set on Ferrari. So when they offered me the job, that was my graduate job. So I have terrible internet security because my first job was Ferrari and my mother's maiden name is Smith, which are both very Googleable, guessable facts. So I started life as a simulation engineer, helping to write the lap time simulation tools that race engineers like Andrea Stella and Ross Medley would use to help set up the cars for the race weekend, and also for the simulator modelling, for the kind of the cues that we used to do in the simulator. But my heart was always with race strategy, so I kind of applied for an internal role transfer to move over to be part of the race strategy group, where I was kind of based at the factory. So I was one of the junior strategists, and Ferrari used to set it up as a car-based system. So I was strategist for Felipe Massa, Kimi Raikkonen the first time, because I met him later again, and Sebastian Vettel.
Very cool, very cool. And from Ferrari?
From Ferrari, I'd had a brief stint at Haas, where I was kind of head of race strategy and got them set up for the first couple of races. So we managed to go from absolutely no team to somehow having two Formula One cars and a P5 and a P6 in the first two races, which was a great achievement. And then again, I kind of got a call from a lovely woman called Manisha Counterborn, who was the team principal at Sauber at the time, which gave me the opportunity to kind of run my own department. So I moved over to Zurich, spent very little time in the UK so far. Moved from Italy to the UK back to Switzerland, and then I've been was head of race strategy for 8 seasons with Sauber, through its various forms of Sauber to Alfa Romeo, where we had Charles with us in 2018, through to its current form at the end of 2023. So yeah, then meeting up with Kimi Raikkonen again for a couple of years in the middle.
Yeah. But what's it like between these different teams, with team camaraderie, the environment, the feeling, the shared purpose? Is it different across those 3 teams that you just touched on?
I would say yes and no. Like ultimately each team has the same kind of, family environment. And I would say even, when you're no longer at a team, or even if you've never been at one, there is one of the things that makes our sport so great is the camaraderie, and is the sportsmanship that goes on between teams. Like I remember being ill when I was with like Haas after leaving Ferrari, and because it was a new team, it was actually all the Ferrari guys that came and looked after me. They got their medical team all sorted and made sure I was okay. And you kind of you end up really kind of becoming a family. I would say obviously like each team's got its own kind of flair, but they're all very similar in terms of everybody, whether you're kind of racing right at the very front or right at the very back, wants to do the absolute best that they can. And actually, we touched on McLaren. There's a really good example. They're the same people winning now, and they're working for just as hard a time as they were when they were getting knocked out in Q1. And it's really, it's testament to the fact that everybody there is working really, really hard. Everyone are there, if you're on the race teams, away from your families. And usually it's always about kind of the joke is about, you see each other in a different T-shirt for about 50 years. It's just rotate T-shirt colours.
yeah, that's very true. It's the Formula One family, and then different rooms in the house, I suppose, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
you can look at it that
it's
way.
Different languages as well, but it's all about one family, and there's a lot more similarities than there are differences, as with most things in elite sport. I think one of my favourite moments, and it's still available on YouTube now, that really encapsulates it. When people ask me what it's like, it's back in 2018, back when Mercedes were winning everything. What a crazy time. When they'd won the championship in Mexico, they put a GoPro on one of the mechanics, and you could see him run from the kind of by the pit board all the way to the podium, which in Mexico is this beautiful, wonderful thing in the big stadium. And on the way, you know, again, probably people didn't even, because it's quite a small camera, people didn't even realise they're being filmed. You could tell from some of the content, they could tell they were not being filmed. You'd see all the other mechanics and all the other team members congratulating them. And it really did show, you know, the camaraderie. You know, you got your Ferraris, you got, you know, you like real rivals, your Red Bulls and stuff like that. Everybody is congratulating them. And I think that really is testament to the fact that, you know, fierce competitors on track, but the second you're off track, it's where are we going for a beer later together.
Yeah, and some of those mechanics congratulating your Mercedes friend will have won a championship before, and they know what he is experiencing, going through in that moment. And also maybe others haven't won a championship, but they aspire to do it, and they just want to be there in front of the podium with a world championship winning driver in front of them, and one day, and that's part of the steps to get there. So I know exactly what you're saying, and I'm sure our listeners do as well. What is involved in being a race strategist, Ruth? How can you break that down? Because for a lot of people who are even involved in Formula One and watch all the races, I was a race strategist, and then they need something explaining. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, so race strategy is basically facilitating the best possible decision making across a race weekend. That's your one liner. So that comes from everything from how do we plan the kind of the data collection going into the race weekend, in terms of what do we need to get in terms of data, what kind of compounds are we going to be using, what kind of run plan do we need to do, what kind of timings do we think we're going to have in qualifying. So that's your kind of your free practice job. Then you're always looking at competitors. How are my competitors doing compared to me, whether that's in terms of performance, whether that's feedback in terms of how they're using the tyres, whether that's feedback in terms of competitor analysis of things like wing level and things like that you can react and change to. Then we've got kind of qualifying, which is we do a lot of the timings for it. So usually if they don't make the flag, it's our fault. So it's not just kind of setting out on timings to make sure you're kind of maximizing for that track the trade-off between track evolution, risk versus reward. Obviously, the later you go out, the better the track is. But the later you go out, you take on more risk in terms of things like a yellow flag or a red flag or a DRS disabled. That means you might lose your lap. Some tracks we need to maximize getting a tow because we want to have a kind of basically someone pulling us along on a long straight. Some tracks you really want free air. You don't want to be stuck up in the dirty air because the trade-off of corners versus straights is different. Some tracks, the tyres are really, really hot, and we have to spend our entire time creeping around trying to make sure the timings are correct so that we can keep them as cool as possible. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes you can do runs on more than one kind of lifespan of the tyre. So sometimes, you know, if you could try to get through with this cutoff that people always talk about, it's about working out how early can I go through and get away with it, or can I bolt on a used tyre and actually get a meaningful lap time. Sometimes you'll even see the big teams, less so now, the pack is more close, using like a medium tyre, like a slower tyre, to try and save one in qualifying. And then once you've hopefully maximised all your data collection, which means you've picked the tyres that you wanted to keep for the race and wanted to keep for qualifying, you've done qualifying, then we have the race itself, which is about deciding how you are going to approach the race stints. That's everything from start tyre. Obviously, weather is a huge part of that, as it is with all of the days, because obviously if it's wet, you know, there's a big difference in terms of the compounds.
I was just about to say, this is perplexing, but then you wake up one morning and the forecast is much worse than maybe when you went to bed 8 hours earlier, and then you've got to change all your plans.
Well, preparation is key. So, you know, unfortunately, you know, we are all in the business of being prepared. So our poor tyre fitters, you'll see them there, you know, it'll be Qatar. The last time it's rained's been like 4 years ago. but they will be out there on a Thursday fitting those Inter and those X-Wet tyres. So yeah, we are actually ready for things like that. So there would never be, hopefully, no, none of the Formula One teams would ever be in a situation where you know they were kind of like cold and around the back, for example. And it's the same thing for us. We'd always do the timings for a wet race, because again, it's the responsibility of thousands potentially of people have put the effort in to make this car for you. So you can't really put finish work at like early and go down to the pub or whatever, by not actually putting in the effort required to do the job properly, which is making sure you've covered all of the base, you've done your homework as much as possible. So yeah, we go into the race, we try and execute the race to the best of our abilities, and then everything we've learned, we assess that. We assess how we did on strategy, we assess how the tyres performed, we assessed how the car performed, we assessed how our competitors performed, both in terms of strategy and performance, and we try and use that to do a better job the next week. And we just keep going, basically. We just rinse and repeat every single race until hopefully at the end of the year you've done a better job on average than your competitors, because that's what it's about. It's not about perfection, it's just about incremental improvement and trying to make fewer mistakes than your opposition.
So if it's a 90-second lap and that's a dry lap, and then it's not really wet, which is, for the sake of discussion, 10 seconds a lap more, it's kind of maybe 7 seconds a lap more, how quickly can you change your strategy for qualifying? I suppose that's maybe the angle I was fishing for.
Yeah, so I mean, with the numbers that you've given, we've all got references, right? So actually, with these current cars, with these current tyres, it's faster on a slick tyre. Depends a little bit per track, but until you get to 112%. So if you're with the numbers that you've said there, about 107%, everyone would be, all 10 teams, that would be quite an easy one actually. Everyone would just be queuing at the end of the pit entry, probably with a couple of extra spare laps of fuel just in case it started raining at the end of the lap, but they'd have slick tyres on, they'd be going out, they'd be trying to get one lap on the board, but they'd have enough fuel in the car, probably the fuel for something like 5-time laps, so that if it started to rain more, they didn't need to pull the car into the garage to refuel. What they could do is they could do a pit stop, a bit like a race, but you're allowed to do them in qualifying, and bolt on those into tyres if it started to go wet. So that one, if you actually knew that information, that would be quite one that we've kind of got a lot of data on. It's much harder when you have kind of things that change in a session, or the forecast is that it's actually dry right now, but rain is coming, but you're not sure when it's coming. And that's typically why, when it comes to a kind of a changeable session, if it's wet and it's going to dry up, or it's wet and it's potentially going to dry up, or it's wet, it's going to stay wet, you hear this phrase fuel for the session, which is basically having enough fuel that covers the entire 18 minutes, 12 minutes, or 15 minutes of the whole session. And that comes with a penalty, depends on the track, of something like 0.6, which sounds like a lot, but if you're playing with a percent, which broadly speaking is a second, actually it's way more sensible to have the fuel in the car, because if you remember when you look at kind of qualifying sessions in the wet, the spread of lap times is so huge that actually the fuel, which is a really important factor in a normal qualifying, because 0.7 in a Formula One Q1 session was the difference between P1 and P20 at the beginning of the year, becomes nothing really. And actually it's about being on track, and if you're in the garage, the bit where it's the driest and you don't get to set a lap, even if you're kind of with the fastest car, the track could be 3 or 4%, 6% slower, and then you are completely stuffed. So yeah, it's about adaptability, but this is one thing that it's born through a lot of experience, not just our experience, but the experience of people that were sat on pit walls before us as well, that we're lucky enough to learn from as well. So I think that's one of the ones where having, I guess we've got 74.99 years of experience now. So I mean, it doesn't always go that way, but at least you've got to try and make it that way if possible. And again, it's about risk versus reward, because let's say Q1, the leaders, the guys with the fastest car, they don't need to risk anything. They just need to get a lap on the board because they've got enough car pace to go. Q1 is, in a wet session, is really terrifying if you're a slower car, because it's risky anyway because you're always on the cusp of going out, but actually also like the opportunity cost if you can get through is massively higher, because let's say it's then a jumbled up session, and then when you get to the later sessions, if you get through to Q3 and you're a Q1 car that's just done well, actually the bias switches, and then suddenly everybody else's turn to be stressed. And you can just go and you can go, well, actually, we're going to, if the casino bet's on red, we're going to bet on black, because if we all end up doing our laps properly, we'll just be last anyway, which is P10, which is actually a great result for us. So we can now it's our turn in the sun where we can actually gamble, and maybe we'll do the thing that's the opposite of what the radar says, because we'll just go back there anyway if we do the lap at the same time as everybody else. But if we get it right, you end up with these stories where you've got Ocon or Stroll on the front row, and that's a combination of both exceptional driving, but also the team making really smart trade-offs between risk and reward in those pointy sessions. So the answer is not the correct answer for everybody. Some sessions it's why are they on a slick tire, but a lot of it is about what's the best thing for you to do. It's a bit like poker. Not everybody's got the same hand, so if you just say fold, it's not really the right answer. It's usually a different answer for different people depending on what they've got to play for and what they're trying to achieve from that day.
Therefore, do you enjoy being under huge pressure?
Yeah, and I think every strategist does, because it's the bit that we actually do all the hard work for. Is the pressure. Pressure is a privilege, which Billie Jean King said so much more eloquently than I did. But it means that something's expected of you, and to get to the point where you actually have pressure, it is the culmination of years and years and years of work, and being able to be put in that position means that someone's entrusted you with that. And if as soon as you don't enjoy that feeling, then there's lots of other jobs that you would enjoy a lot more than race strategy. But actually, every race strategist, they love the thrill of being able to do it, and that's what we live for. Really, it's a bit like asking Pat Mahomes if he prefers practice or the Super Bowl. Like, he's going to say, "I prefer the Super Bowl," even if it's more stressful, because that's what all the hard work is for. That's why you do your practice sessions, is so you get the opportunity to perform. And I think most of us strategists, we're really bad when it comes to like, oh, you got 2 months for a deadline. We're like, oh yeah, I'll circle back. Give us 2 hours to do an impossible task, and we'll be right there. So I think we're trained to be like, we have to give ourselves fake deadlines as a people.
It's the same in journalist world. Trust me. We all work to deadlines, don't we? Now, analytics data, huge amounts of gigabytes being recorded off a car every lap. How well do the drivers understand data and how it can help them?
I think they definitely do. I don't think you can get to the kind of the pinnacle of motorsport without having that as a skill. Whether it's really understanding in terms of the physics behind how a system works. Some of them are really interested in there. Some of them you wouldn't even expect. Someone like Kimi Räikkönen, absolutely obsessed with the inner workings of a power unit around 2014. So don't ever judge a book by a cover. Obviously, Verstappen is a maths and geography nerd. Who would have thought that? So I would say definitely don't judge the books by the cover. Obviously, everyone knows Seb is a nerd, and he is a nerd. So sometimes it does look like it is, but a lot of them, actually being able to give good feedback, you really need to understand the technical of the car. They've worked so hard on their craft, and I think naturally, even if as an engineer, you'd hope engineering better than your driver, that none of them are stupid. They're all smart kids, and they're all able to understand input and output, which is what you need to do as a driver. And I think when you look at the way that they're managing various different elements of the car, you see what they're doing on telemetry. They're changing brake bias and finding it out. Like they're contributing as an engineer as well as a driver. So I think it's it's a really impressive skill, certainly for me, because I'm like, I have to put the radio down when I parallel park, so I'm impressed.
We've seen a lot of rally drivers go to the workshop to help build a car. Have you ever had any drivers kind of spend a lot of time when the car has been constructed at a factory, come and see the inner workings in a relaxed environment during the winter?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much all of them do. I think the one that was spent the most amount of time that really impressed me, then went on to win the F2 championship, was Théo Pourchaire, who did an entire great, like, you know, internship program. So it was like got to a point where I think people forgot that he was actually a driver across winter, because he spent a week in every single department. You know, he was there like down in design, because he was like, you know, I really want to understand about like how everything was going on. Did some time with us in strategy. He was a great strategist. We took him on board. Yeah, no, I mean, I think obviously depending on their schedules, you know, it's difficult to spend that much time in the factory, especially once the season has started. But you know, it's a requirement really nowadays to kind of you see the amount of time that drivers spend in the simulator. That's really the biggest kind of the amount of time that they kind of have to do, both for, you know, getting the initial setup of the car correct ahead of a race weekend event. You know, like we just, you know, it's the way the world is moving. It's the correct direction, that we don't, you know, go out and burn a load of fossil fuels. We do it all on a setup thing. So we don't have days and days of practice. And, you know, if you don't have a good initial setup, or someone else has done it for you, you could be on the back foot when it comes to your, you know, thing. So every single world champion spends time in the simulator now, and has done their entire, you know, racing career development. I mean, you look at some of the drivers like Jack Doohan, for example, who will be in the Alpine next year as a Formula One driver. But you know, you speak to the people in that team, and a big reason why they gave him the call up was because of like both his work attitude and his feedback in the simulator. Kind of, you'd have a bad Friday, but go in the simulator, be driving till 2-3 a.m. He'd come up with the help of the engineers with some good suggestions in terms of setup items. They'd then put those setup items on the car in FP3, and suddenly they'd have a kind of a turnaround the weekend. So, you know, it's a really key element of, you know, not just for the race drivers, but for the development drivers, for the engineers, for everybody. And it's the same thing with things like, you know, simulated steering wheel development, making sure that all the electronic settings, you know, they're really complicated machines, you know, that they're to your liking. We had Kimi, I think the first year, winter testing, which was absolutely freezing, doing his own seat out the back of our out the back in the paddock, being like, no, I don't like it like this, we're going to do it. And someone else was like, oh no, I can do it. And he's like, no, it's fine, just get me a, like, you know, a scalpel. And it kind of got like this massive like kind of hubbub where, you know, we ended up with like a bunch of, you know, photographers that were like, why is this world champion doing his own seat? And this poor guy like stood by it being like, I tried, I can't help it, he's just doing it himself. So yeah, I think it is, you know, and they are drivers are just as much a member of the team as, you know, anyone else, whether it's your technical director, your pit stop crew, your engineers, your catering, your drivers. You know, everyone wears the same colour t-shirt for a reason, because they're all part of the same team.
You've been at Ferrari. We all know about the huge pressure that Ferrari are under, not only from Italy, but the fans around the world, from the Tifosi. Did you feel there was extra pressure at Ferrari over Haas or Sauber?
I don't think so. Also because my first reference was Ferrari, so that was kind of like the first thing I knew. And you know, people talk about the pressure that comes from the Tifosi, but I don't think it's fair to mention that without mentioning the love and adoration and support that you also get from the Tifosi. You know, the amount of support and praise and just genuine outpourings of love you also get, is that it's actually a very balanced relationship generally. Yeah. You know, overall, and like, you know, like I say, I love the Tifosi. You look at the amount of passion that they have. You look at like how when you have a good result, you know, like kind of like hailed, like, you know, not just the drivers, but you know, you're held like a, you know, like kind of a national hero. So I think, you know, it's a different trade-off. But you know, it is their national team. You know, it's like, you know, if you want to play, you know, football for England or cricket for India, or you want to be in Formula One for Italy, like everyone knows what they're signing up for when they go work at Ferrari. And it's truly just an honor to be part of the Tifosi, and to be part of that family, and to be to be kind of, delivering results to a group of incredibly supportive fans that are not just in Italy, all the way around the world, but that it means so much to. So yeah, again, pressure is a privilege, yeah, they're great. It's a great feeling when you do a good result there.
And what was that feeling like when you walked into Monza with a red Ferrari shirt on?
I mean, you have it everywhere in Italy. It's amazing. Like I remember, kind of when we had the kind of, I was at the factory in Maranello, which, you don't normally even really notice in, anywhere. And like the whole of the town is lined with, Ferrari flags. And as you're going into work, I remember on that Sunday morning, it was for the Brazil Grand Prix in 2012, when it was kind of down to the wire between Fernando Alonso and Seb. And people were like cheering us into work on a Sunday, like the grad kids. And I remember after, like race wins, like I got given a flower in the street by someone. So I mean, it's. I mean, when you do badly, they also let you know. But like you can't ever say that it's not a kind of I would say a balanced relationship. It's just it's like say trying to like talk to an English person about how they feel about England. Everyone thinks they could be England captain, don't they? Until we do a good result, and then suddenly we they're a god again. So I think it's one of the things that makes sport great, isn't it? It's that passion, it's truly a really cool feeling. So yeah, I love the Tifosi.
A name you'll know well, Alan Jenkins, designer and engineer from Formula One some years ago, but he went to Ducati and he designed the Ducati MotoGP bikes at the end of the 990, in the beginning of the 800 era, 05, 6 and into 7, and they won the championship with Casey Stoner in 07. But when they announced that they had Ducati had signed Valentino Rossi, the day after, Alan and a few other Ducati colleagues had gone to a wind tunnel up the road, and they're in a car with their red kit on, and they'd stopped at some traffic lights, and people were crossing the zebra crossing, saw them and applauded them, even in the street, like you say, applauded because Valentino was going to Ducati. It wasn't a successful couple of years, but they didn't know that at the time, and Valentino was going to Ducati, and he will always regale that story. So there's a bit of similarity there. How do you think Lewis is going to get on at Ferrari starting next year?
I mean, I think he's probably bored of me telling him how great it is. I'm like, you're going to have the best time. It's going to be amazing. Like, just watch the pasta. This is a lot of good food. No, I'm very, very excited. I think it's so significant for our sport, for Italy, to have Ferrari there. And I think what he's achieved with Mercedes is absolutely phenomenal. And whether or not he wins a world championship, I mean, I'm sure he'll win races, but whether or not he wins a world championship at Ferrari, I think it's an absolutely brilliant story. And like I can't wait for him to see it and to experience it. And I think it's he's got so many world championships. He's done Mercedes for ages. Might as well have some nice sun in Italy. Like I think a change is as good as a rest. Like we don't want him retiring anytime soon. So if this is what keeps him motivated in the sport, we'll all be very sad the day that Lewis leaves. So both for his driving and for him as a human being, he's a really phenomenal talent. As a person and as a driver. So yeah, whatever he wants to do that will make him happy and stay for a lot longer is good by me. He can outrun Fernando as far as I'm concerned.
There's an element that I can look back to the early 90s, mid 90s, that would Senna have gone to McLaren? That never happened, but Lewis is going. So there's a little bit of me with Lewis's love of Senna, the yellow crash helmet that he had, that what could have been, and now hopefully we're going to see it. So fingers crossed. There's been a major push for gender and cultural diversity in Formula One, and you've become a role model for girls and women within the sport. How have you seen the sport change since you've been involved?
Amazingly so. It really has changed so that, I think when you look at kind of every element of Formula One, whether it's the teams, whether it's the people at the track, whether it's the fan base. And it's not about being pro women. It's about being pro everybody. And actually, as a sport, we are going to have such a better sport if we have the best of absolutely everybody, not just the best of 50% of society, or actually even smaller than that, because it's just a very small slither of people that historically were very overrepresented in F1, and we still want those people. We just want everyone else as well. And I think in terms of making our sport bankable, from a purely economic perspective, before Liberty took over, the average fan of Formula One was a 52-year-old blue-collar worker from Coventry. And now we are 40% female, 42%, I believe, under 25. And in terms of the longevity of our sport, we can't survive with just a tiny sliver of society. We can't expand. We can't, we don't want to be a sport that's kind of, having a decreasing population in 20 years' time because we're just not advertising to the next generation. We need to make sure that we keep doing a good job of making a sport that the fans that have been following it for 30 years, like your traditional markets, we still need to make sure that we're doing a good sport for those people, but we also need to, from a financial perspective, from a sports perspective, and frankly from an equality perspective, we want to make it that it's a sport that everybody can go to. And I think you go to COTA, and that was one of the first races that we went to after the kind of the Drive to Survive effect with Netflix, and after COVID, that we had full fans at. And it was absolutely amazing because, instead of it kind of just being one slither of society that was the kind of fans, you get used to seeing it, you kind of forget. I remember being overwhelmed because there was families, there was, people clearly on dates, there was, groups of kind of couples of boys, couples of girls, big families. And you're like, well, no wonder it's sold out if you're actually now able to sell tickets to everybody. If instead of kind of someone just taking their son, they're taking their son and their daughter and their wife, now we've got 4 tickets rather than 2. So, I think it's, and I think in terms of the sport, internally as well, it's changed so much. It's getting to the point now where it's starting to stop counting, which is what I've always wanted to be, because we're not like, oh, there's 4 women in this team and there's 3, when we get to the point we can't keep the count, I think that's a good sign. And when we get to the point where it's the norm that you have kind of like a balanced and well represented team that is also representative of society, I think it's the way to go, because I've never seen any evidence that statistically says because I'm a woman, I'm better or worse at engineering than a man. I've never seen any evidence that statistically says that because I'm white, that makes me a better or worse engineering than somebody that comes from a BIPOC background. So it's about opportunity, and it's about making sure that we at the grassroots level have equal representation of people taking on STEM subjects, because then chances are that we'll find the best people from a bigger pool. So I think, and then you look at the driving question as well, there is an awful lot of, drivers that fail to get to the top. You think of 100 kids that go karting, well, not even one of them is going to make it into Formula One. Probably it's thousands of kids that go karting. One of them will make it into Formula One. So if only 20 of them are female, the chances that one of those 20 is going to be one of the ones that's going to end up, in Formula One is so small. But if you make it double that and you actually got half and half representation, it's going to be much easier to find, the kind of the talent that's going to be out there. And I think that's what the F1 Academy is so good at, is we're raising awareness that actually motorsport is for everybody, and you can be female or male, and you can ask your mum or your dad, I'd like to go out and do this, and it's not just for the boys. Still is for the boys, but it's also for the girls as well.
How inspiring has Iron Dames been for you? They've been knocking on the door of winning their class at Le Mans and winning in endurance races. And it's, as you've mentioned, so difficult to get to the top, even into Formula One. But there's so much motorsport, and I don't want to say this, but elsewhere, I won't say below Formula One, but elsewhere. How inspiring has Iron Dames been?
Amazing. And the nice thing is that you haven't just got Iron Dames. You can look at like IndyCar, and you can look at how Catherine Legg, you can look at how, you see how well Jamie Chadwick, who was the champion of the W Series, is getting on now in the Indy Next, the feeder series for IndyCar. You can look at Abby Pulling, who's winning races in British F4, which is as well as leading the current F1 Academy Championship. And there's more and more of these stories, and they're becoming harder and harder to remember all of them, which is a great thing. You actually get to the point where you're starting to forget about kind of various different kind of achievements because there's so many, which is exactly the way the situation should be. So like I said, I think it wants to get to the point. It feels like it's getting to the point now where it's not special, which is a good thing because it means there's enough of it that you actually kind of oh, okay, yeah, that's fine, rather than wow, this is brand new information. Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And you obviously Dorian, who's one of the Iron Thames drivers, is doing so well in F1 Academy and coming back from an injury as well, which is it kind of shows that these sports stories it can happen to everybody. You can have good and bad sports stories, and I really like the fact that we're showcasing all sides of it, of sport, and the fact that it's not always winning and great sponsorship deals. Sometimes it's coming back from an injury, and then standing on a podium probably means even more.
And there's also a lady from Spain, Cristina Gutierrez. She won her class in the Dakar. She's a world champ, FIA Rally Raid world champion. She's got a big factory drive starting this week, actually, with Dacia in the top class of Rally Raid. So there's another name. For those of you listening, if you haven't
she's
heard,
brilliant. Yeah.
She is just unstoppable.
Yeah, I like her a lot. We should have the pleasure of seeing her quite often in a paddock. But yeah, it's a really wonderful community and a growing community of female drivers, which I'm definitely not one. I'm the strategist, so I will happily continue in my passenger princess role.
Passenger princess, you've kept that back until now. Things have changed. You are now working with F1 TV and you're calling the strategy shots of what everybody's doing, not just your car. How are you finding it from a TV point of view now?
It's brilliant. I mean, I think actually kind of what you guys see at home is only really like in most things to do with strategy, kind of one of the elements of what I get to do. I'm working with Formula One, helping with the graphics department, where you see kind of the F1 AWS, which is our technical partner, like the things that we're able to achieve now in terms of kind of like AI applications to Formula One is really phenomenal, and it's on par in sometimes ahead of teams. So we had a great occasion where we were kind of creating the same VCAR traces that we used to compare performance. So looking at where the cars were fast and slow. And we had that kind of up on the part firme screen 7 minutes after the end of the session, which is actually before the guys in the team, a very good team by the way, had the data, because I got 3 texts after being like, how do you get this information so fast? I was like, well, still a strategist. Yeah. So I mean, I think in terms of the technicalities of it, whether it's kind of being a strategist for people at home or for a team, the pressure is definitely still the same in terms of making sure that we can really use all the tools we have as available to us in terms of bringing the strategy stories out and to the forefront, showcasing some of the great stories that maybe haven't been highlighted for some of the drives in midfield, and also really trying to make sure that when you're watching along at home, you can also have a crack at being a strategist and seeing how you would do it, because everyone loves a bit of couch strategy.
Certainly do. Do you miss being at the coalface though? Do you miss being on the pit wall?
It's interesting because actually the pressure that I feel from helping direct a world feed when we've got one RF camera and I've got to decide which garage it's likely to go to, or you're kind of putting out a strategy brief to all of the countries that we broadcast to in F1 TV, or you're on commentary, and you're being asked what's the strategy. It's the same. It's the same feeling. I think that's the thing about sports, and also because I'm able to now work in other sports. I've been able to do IndyCar strategy with teams this year. I'm working with some endurance teams. So I still feel like I'm doing maybe I feel like I'm doing more strategy. I feel like I'm doing fewer meetings and emails, less paperwork, but I feel like I'm
Mm,
doing more strategy, significantly more strategy actually than being a manager in a Formula One team. And I was also one of the lovely things about Alfa Romeo is it's based in Switzerland, and my husband now is based in the UK. So another thing that it's enabled me to do is to move back to the UK and finally get married. So I am very happy and not missing that particular coalface. I'll go for my other fires at the moment.
good, good. Not too many races remaining in 24. 2025, the last year of the current regulations. What do you think fans, listeners will see from the teams to the end of 25?
I think more of the same. I think it's going to be a really interesting season. If you think back to 2013, for example, I think it's kind of similar. So 2012, we had seven race winners in the first seven races or something crazy. We had this massive title fight down to the wire, and then we had the new power unit regulations coming in 2014 and 2013. You know, it was far from a duffer. We had this massive title fight between Red Bull, between Ferrari. You also have this extra really cool element that I think is what we're going to see next year, where in a more extreme way than we see normally, you really have teams deciding whether they're going to put their focus on the current season or on the next season. Now that extends normally to some levels, but obviously your swing and your miss is really different. Your trade-offs are so different. I think you're going to see some really fantastic movements around in the driver market based on current performance of where teams are in 2025, projected performance of where teams are in 2026, bearing in mind that with the way the regulations are set up right now, it looks like it's more likely to be like a power unit formula. And what we mean by that is a bit like 2014, where actually right now the power units are really quite similar in terms of the performance. You don't go, oh, this race is it's got lots of straights on it, therefore so and so is going to win. It's a lot more about kind of the chassis percentage. Whereas actually kind of if you look at the way the regulations are written in their current form, it's way more likely to be used to do with both the power unit and the fuel. So we've had power unit before. We haven't really had a fuel war. Someone can probably tell me I'm wrong, and there's been in the 80s, but at least in my recent memory, we haven't really had the same thing that actually because renewable fuel. That this could also be a huge performance difference is actually fuel level in terms of across the different fuel suppliers. And then, of course, the chassis is still an important element. So I think it's really fantastic to see kind of like how those are going to play in. And bearing in mind, 2026 starts on January 1st, 2025. Because from, 1 minute past the end of the kind of the factory shutdown we have, you can then spend your aerodynamic beans on 2026 or 2025. So you could theoretically shelve your 2025 car in January and just put it all on 2026. Or you could try and win a championship now, because obviously still it's only going to be one person that's going to come out on top in 2026. So it's a really interesting one. And again, in terms of aerodynamic development, there's a lot to be said for the fact that, it isn't the case that you have one set of rules and then you put everything you've learned in the bin. It doesn't work like that. There's a lot of transferable knowledge in terms of understanding, the kind of the technological arms race of how you develop aerodynamics, how your software works, how your correlation works, how your wind tunnel works. And so it isn't as easy as saying, oh, I'll just focus on 2026, because actually, there is many arenas of aerodynamic development where your understanding and performance you add to a 2025 car would help you twice over, or maybe even three times over, because it could even highlight an issue you had with your wind tunnel that if you don't fix, you're going to carry that miscorrelation issue, or you're going to carry that issue through to the next generation. So it's always a really exciting one. I can't wait. And I think we've got the current crop of drivers, Lewis to Ferrari, as you say. You've got both like McLaren drivers driving kind of at the peak of their game. the moment it doesn't look like they're in the fight right now for the Drivers' Championship this season. But if McLaren keep the performance up, then, you would have to put those two up there in terms of being potential championship competitors. Obviously, you've also got Max, who's going to be, coming off the back probably from this season with just one championship at the moment, with potentially the constructors going to the McLaren. So yeah, I think it'll be great. I can't wait. I think it's going to be fantastic.
What are the cars going to look like? We've seen some mock-ups. Are they about right? Do you reckon they're going to look like that?
In 2026 or 25?
26.
Yeah, I think so. They're still, I mean, I think broadly speaking, it's going to be pretty much that shape. There's a lot of kind of detail that's going on, as there always is. This happens every single rule thing about the balance of performance in terms of minimizing this dirty air, which gives you kind of a good racing product, i.e. you can follow, you can overtake, but making the cars fast enough around the corners that we still have lap times that are really fast. So that process is a very, very difficult process to maximize. And the FIA will give out a set of regulations. The teams will then give feedback, and there's genuine feedback, but there's also every team's got an agenda. They're going to want to push the regulations slightly towards a way that they feel like they can benefit. I think that kind of broadly everyone said that the first numbers were basically they didn't provide the base to be kind of quick enough in some of the corners. I think that, recently we had the kind of the WMC meeting with all team principals last week. So it's an iterative process. They've still got a couple of months to do it. And bearing in mind, if it's, off the mark, we've seen in-season changes before, and we've also seen changes between seasons. If you look at just how dramatic it was with the changes on that Mercedes in terms of their kind of floor and performance, it kind of really jumped completely down. So I think that, I hope that, we'll kind of hit the ground running. But I think even if we don't, we've got a good history of fixing things quickly.
Certainly do. Ruth, I can't keep you for much longer because in the next few weeks you're going where?
So yeah, a bunch of American motorsports clients, then the Austin Grand Prix, and then Mexico, and then Brazil. So we've got the triple header ahead of the next lot to go for the last 6 races of the season. So lots of travel, but I love Austin. I love Mexico. I'm a big fan of a good picanha steak. So I'm pretty looking forward to all 3.
Thank you so much. I've been involved in motorsport for many years. I've learned something today, and I hope that our listeners will have learned something as well. That you've got so much to tell people and so much experience. It can only grow, and you've said it, in the next 4 weeks, you're going to be at 4 different circuits and such like. So that's absolutely fantastic. Ruth Buscombe, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe to the Business of Winning podcast. And if you want to learn more about performance insights, simply visit our website at performanceinsights.co.uk, providing expert speakers and hosts from the world of Formula One motor racing to corporate events and conferences worldwide.